This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, this is Paul, and I'm with Colin today. Colin made his way down to Sacramento um, in the heat of summer and learned just how hot the Central Valley can be. And I'll warn you, if you're taking a trip to California in the summertime, drive a car with air conditioning because you can opening the windows doesn't make 110 any less 110. It just makes it faster.
No. I will say I'm from British Columbia and we get hot weather here too. We're not the Canadian stereotype, but yeah, like when you're going through the interior around Kamloops, you have to keep it above like 130 kilometers, or else the air coming in isn't warm, isn't cold at all.
Yeah.
So I was prepared for that heat that day. I just didn't factor in my car cooking outside the Castle Air Museum parking lot. So I quickly picked up on that within an hour. And yeah, that was quite the, well, I look on it now less of a road trip and more like a pilgrimage.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, what do you want to do? Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit first, and then we can take the conversation wherever you want?
Sure. Yeah. I'm from BC, born and raised. I'm at the moment, I switched from working on a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology to one in social work because it provides more flexibility with what I want to do. I'm going to be like a clinical counselor, which is like a psychologist without all the fancy stuff. And it's more like the boots on the ground things. And also with the social work thing, if that doesn't pan out, I can get into some other things. But I have a feeling with the way things are going, there's always going to be a need for things like counseling even more. And well, yeah, people might think that AI does that, but as you said, it's so obsequious and all of that it doesn't challenge you, and that's a big thing. I think counseling is really going to appreciate more and more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you want to talk a little bit about the home you grew up in?
a little bit. I Are you ready for it? Because
Go for it.
I love history and I like going into my family's history. So
Well, it's an interesting history.
yeah. So on my dad's side, I'm Mennonite, and they always talked about being Dutch Mennonite, which is strictly speaking correct because we originated on Texel, but we actually go back to before the Dutch were distinct from the Deutsch. So yeah, and from there we picked up some family from like the Duchy of Cleves, hopped over to like the Marienburg colony south of Danzig, and hung around there for a while. It was only until like the 1840s or 1850s that they went to the Ukraine, which is like way past Catherine the Great when they're first invited. And then we're only there until like the 1890s, and then we bucked out to Canada and the US. And that was, I guess, we're a part of the first exodus, and then they were the group that kind of helped out the rest of the Mennonites in the Russian Revolution. Because I know it was quite a nasty situation where like they sent off like half a dozen guys and only like one or two guys came back alive.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, my family, they kind of made it over to North America, wandered around. My grandma was born somewhere in like the top of Saskatchewan. Dad was born in Catharines. So, and then they eventually made their way to Surrey. With that said, my family's small enough that if you ever run into anyone with my name, it's going to be family. And my dad did that because trucking. And so yeah, they eventually made their way there. I kind of look on Anabaptists in a way like Jews, where there's a spectrum where you have like the Haredi, like the Orthodox Jews, they're like the Amish. And then the Hutterites are kind of like the conservative Jews, where they kind of keep things, but they don't mind technology. And then Mennonites, they're kind of towards like the left-leaning side of Judaism, where like they might be like really keeping with things, but others are just whatever goes. And so my dad's family was kind of on the anything goes, and they kind of bled out into the rest of North American Christianity. Dad like was Salvation Army. Ironically, at the
People,
time,
let me just say a word about Salvation Army because many people listening to this don't understand that Salvation Army is actually a church. A
yeah,
lot of people think of Salvation Army as sort of this parachurch, downtown,
hmm,
homeless group. But Salvation Army, if you do any research at all, it's actually a church, and it's a very
yeah.
interesting tradition, actually.
Hmm. And I know it's quite polarizing. People either really love it or hate it for good reasons.
Well, and we had this on this live stream. We had this big conversation about military metaphors. Well, Salvation Army took that on completely. They
Yeah,
use military ranks and the whole kit and caboodle.
yeah. um, so yeah, they came to Surrey. They kind of hung out, and even though like they kind of stopped being Mennonite, there is still the ethno part of it. And as I told you, that you're surprised about, where the reason why I don't like look on myself as Mennonite and I take after my mom's side, not simply because I look like it, more and have the temperament, is there's a lot of dysfunction there. And like the big thing for my mom from being British was the pacifism. And it wasn't just the pacifism, it was then you look at the family life and there's a lot of domestic abuse. And it's seen as completely normal. And the term I gave to it is like the old German way of the household, where like the husband's God, husband, father's God, whatever he says goes. And if anybody steps out of line, they get it at like the slightest hint of defiance. And that's both the children and the wife. And like it's the complete opposite of my mom's culture. To her, she said later on afterwards, she's like, she couldn't have married someone from the darkest part of Africa and been in a more alien culture. And of course, the big thing that really grated her with that was the hypocrisy. Because to her, being British, and you've been talking about World War II consensus there, and I've lived it with that shadow. And for her, it's like you use violence to protect people, and then it's like you're not fighting other men, but you don't mind going after your family that way. So, yeah, I can see with that where that put a lot of pressures amongst many other things. One thing I've come to realize is that I thought it was originally my family's wild streak, but I see it with Mennonites. And it's not simply like the Amish thing where they go crazy, whatever the term is for that like wild thing that happens and when they become a teen.
Oh, Rumspringa.
Yeah, it's not like that. It's like there's always that underlying thing there. And yeah, as I told you, some of my family stories, they're quite crazy. And when I run into people now and I start hearing like some of their stories, like I had a math teacher who when he was like 6 or 8, he got into making model rockets, and he transitioned into designing his own rockets and then designing his own rocket fuels. And then that ended when he was like 9, when one exploded and almost killed him. And as I'm listening to him talking, I was like, "Are you Mennonite?" And he's like, "Yeah, Dirksen." And I'm like, "I know. It's that same crazy thing." And there's a whole bunch of family stories. Like I'm trying to think about, because the Fraser River isn't like Columbia River big, but it isn't like Sacramento River small.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
kind of
big
in
river.
between. Yeah, it's a big river. And like my dad and his brothers made a boat out of a board of plywood. And they found a little bit of like a little engine, strapped it to the end, and they were going around on this huge river with it. And I think dad steered, Jim was on the bow calling out where to turn. And Uncle Harold, who was the brains, he was the one sitting next to the engine, constantly switching out spark plugs because they had a bunch of old ones that they gathered. And sometimes they would burn out and he would have to switch them in. And then as they're doing that, they're like slowly sinking as they're like going around these huge freight ships. And that's just like one of the stories. And I'll have to say the other one, which is where my family could have prevented Queen Elizabeth from ascending to the throne. Because the year before she became Queen Elizabeth, she went on a Trans Canada tour on the railroad, and her train stopped somewhere near the Surrey Flats, near the Petula Bridge, which is where my family grew up. And my dad and his brothers got wind of this, so they decided to go out and check it out. And they didn't have binoculars, and the closest thing they had to it was the scope on the rifle. So of course, them being them, because like Uncle Jim had also like taken a pot shot at the neighbor as he was doing the dishes once to razz him. They brought it loaded, and they were exchanging, looking through the scope. And then Jim, the wild one, he kind of gets calm as he's looking, and he's like, I could totally get her from this distance. But then it was like, no.
God save the Queen, please.
Especially from my family. So yeah, that's kind of how my family on the dad's side is. He had a lot put on him with that. Because there's 4 kids. The oldest, his sister, she got married at like 16 or 17 and got the heck out of the household. Jim, it's lucky he survived. He went wild until he kind of came to Christ and cleaned up his act later on in life. And Harold, he was the brains, so he kind of went into books, got married to an Aussie gal, took off there and became a professor. And Dad, he was always a loner. And yeah, he just liked being with animals, being separate. He always felt alone. And he really should not have been married. And he eventually found his calling being a truck driver, where he would run into people and chat them up, and then he'd never see them again. And yeah, so that was kind of his situation. And then on my mom's, we're what I call Dominion Canadian, which if you kind of learn Canadian history, we're like in charge of Canada probably around the turn of the century until like the 50s or 60s. And it was originally, who made up Canada were the French Canadians, the Native American, or the natives, and the United Empire Loyalists, which were kind of a bunch of British that came over after New France was taken, but the heart of them were actually Americans that were kicked out.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Because like during the War of Independence, it was like 1/3 were for it, 1/3 were against it, and 1/3 just went along with whatever.
Yeah.
And the 1/3 that were loyal got kicked out. A lot of them eventually made their way back in, and it created this weird, complicated situation. I know you love history, so look at the War of 1812 at some point, because around the Niagara region, it turned into like a civil war, where you had people who were like in Canada, they started to not dislike their neighbors. And then when America invaded, they formed militias and switched sides. And actually what they were doing could be argued to be, they're the reason why Washington, D.C. got burned later on. Because they were going around kind of destroying their neighbors' farmland to get out these little bits of revenge. And that kind of spread, but it wasn't really official. Britain, in its typical way, later on when that happened, they reached for an excuse and they went, oh, you burned down York City Hall, which was Toronto then. But it was just retrofitting an excuse. So yeah, we were, an Australian I know on the naval board put it, we were the British that went out into the empire, and simply because the empire ceased to be does not mean that we cease to be British. And yeah, Canadian identity is funny because there's many different kinds of Canadians, and the only thing we're united in is not being American. That is the basis of Canadian identity.
Well, diversity is your strength, right? You're not even a nation. You're just diverse.
Well, it's a thing, yeah. And like it's been said that like our nationalism is the only anti-nationalistic nationalism. And that's why I find it funny where like the whole tariff thing going on right now, you guys are throwing us a bone in a way because you've actually kind of reawakened that a bit. So we'll see how far it goes.
Donald Trump making Canada great again, or making Canada whole again.
Well, it kind of is annoying for like people on the conservative side because he picked the most awful time to be doing that, because everybody was itching to kick Trudeau and the Liberals out, and then he starts acting up right as the election begins, and then everybody really threw in for the Liberals and gave them another minority government.
You know,
So,
someday, you know that whole meme that Jar Jar Binks is actually a Sith?
yeah,
Someday historians are going to go back and say Donald Trump was actually a liberal. It'll make the argument, and the Canadian election will be like one of their big points. See, he made sure that Canada stayed in the fold of the left.
yeah. Well, he's a whole nother thing unto himself. I'll talk later about that with my own history during that period with 2016. But
Okay, so
yeah,
you grow up in a house that is not a happy home.
no, and yeah, yeah, I'm trying to. I'll skip over my grandparents there because they were quite big influence there. But yeah, mom, we were raised Pentecostal. I call myself Pentecostal, even though I'm an unconventionally conventional one. By the time, yeah, mom, she was going to nursing in Victoria. She is the kind of woman. She never missed a day of Sunday school until she left for Victoria. Um, and she met and made a friend, Colleen, who's the Aussie girl. And she got married to Harold, and through them, they heard a dad. And she is a complicated lady. And one aspect of her is if somebody recommended something, she'd just go out and like buy that one product. And so they recommended dad. So she just went out and got married to him after 11 days. And then she's like later on, like, what's a Mennonite? And what is this? And then she's slowly realizing she married a German and that she's like, I'm sleeping with the enemy now. Because to her, to go into like the World War II consensus thing, um, like I very early picked up with mom that like her story of the world is whatever history there was. And there was like the Bible in the beginning was like 1914. And the Germans were bad and they started World War One. They lost. Then they became evil. Then they started World War Two and lost again. And then everything else has come from since then. And yeah, she was born in 1947. So that very much hung over her and it colored so much. And yeah, from kind of the get go, things were dysfunctional in the family. Dad, though, with what work he had, kept it local. It was kind of sane. One of the major things that wore it was like a constant acid on the relationship was dad. Mom was like picked up the Scottish miser side of the family. Dad, money went through his hands like water. And like where we're at, I'm on Vancouver Island. That's where she was born. My mom was born and raised. You use the ferry a lot. And like one of the things mom would make a big deal about is like never go into the gift shop, never buy anything from there, save your money. Dad would come home with a whole bunch of stuff from the gift shop and just throw it aside and never look at it. So that war, and it's actually a lot more common than people realize. Like, do you remember the book or film Angela's Ashes?
I never read it, but a
Yeah.
lot of people talked about it. My wife read it, and my wife was like, "Oh."
My mom read that and it was like, yes, this is the way it is with stupid idiots and stuff. And
Mm.
it really resonated with her because of what she was dealing with. And yeah, uh, my dad had a first marriage. I have an older brother from it. And then after mom and dad got married, they had my older brother, Greg. And mom went through quite a trial giving birth to him, where it's a miracle she lived. Yeah, to start off, when she went into labor and got brought in, the doctor was like, I'm not done making my rounds yet, so delay the labor. And like, it's only beginning when I'm ready. So he took like 2 or 3 hours wandering around the hospital. Then he came in, and then like her birth canal, sometimes women have like a muscle that blocks it. So he cut that without anesthetic. And then Greg wasn't coming out, so he grabbed him by the skull with tongs and ripped him out, which causes cerebral palsy. Greg wasn't affected. But as he did that, he inverted Mom's uterus. And whenever she brought that up with doctors afterwards, doctors were like, no, that didn't happen. And she's like, well, it did. And they're like, no, if it had happened, you would be dead. So that didn't happen. And she's like, well, no, it did. It got that like that, and then they stuffed it back in. So that's the reason why it took 12 years for her to come around to having another kid.
Yeah, I can imagine. So there's 12 years between you and your older brother.
Yeah, and like
That's a lot.
17 for my, yeah. And my oldest cousin is like 8 years older than me. So that's why Mom always said that like I grew up with like a sick sense of humor and all that because I was raised around jaded teenagers. Yeah. And yeah, the other issue I've been like reflecting on more lately is like by the time I came along, things were getting like really bad with my family.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad, this was something Mom always disputed with me, but I could see the pattern where Dad, with his impulsivity buying stuff, he would get a new toy and then he'd get tired of it. Like he bought a motorcycle once and he really wanted one with like gold plated rims, but he couldn't afford that. So he got ones with like platinum. And after a few years, he practically gave it away. Then he got a boat and gave it away a few years later, got a telescope, gave it away. Mom was the kind of person, despite being miserly, her thing was you go the extra mile to buy something of quality and then you keep it. So for her, every time this happened, she's like, awesome. Like the boat will go up around the strait and do all this other stuff with the family. And that's, oh, it's gone. And so that really wore on her. And I also could see where eventually Dad reached the point where like his family became an old toy. But the way he was raised, he was, you could say, socialized enough not just to abandon his family. Mom was convinced later on he was a sociopath, and I would say he certainly had sociopathic tendencies, being very antisocial. He's more, I'm not sure how much you know of it, there's two factors. One is like the Machiavellianism, the manipulation, which incidentally is like my uncle, who my mom's sister married. And the other one is impulsivity.
Wait, your father and his brother married sisters.
No.
Oh.
My mom's sister, Sharon, she married a
not someone who's a relative of your father. Okay.
No.
I was gonna say that's
completely different, but okay. Yeah, he's still kind of sociopathic guy. He's a whole nother story. He's actually like the closest thing to evil that I've met in my life.
Wow.
Yeah. I've told stories to other family members about him, and they've just looked at me like, no, that's not real. And then they talk to my aunt, and then they're giving me glances like everything you said was right.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, it's kind of like telling someone after you, like about the concentration camps after you grew up in them.
Yeah.
And being told that that's not real. So yeah, with Dad, with his impulsivity, he found a way to like leave his family but not leave it. And he got into trucking, which is awesome. He's bringing in money for his family, but he's also away for most of the year. He only comes back to kind of touch base and leave. And that was the thing that destroyed the marriage, was the distance. And then like one thing led to another, and by the early 90s, he wound up having an affair with a neighbor. Mom, with a bunch of pressure that went on with that too. I later found out about it a few years ago when I went through her stuff. She did calendars for scheduling everything with the family, and they turned into her journals. She'd write down her fears. And so I was reading through her history, and then from like the beginning, from January of 1994 to about May or June, written across everything was no check from Dad. And that was around the time Grandma moved in with us, and just to give us our pension and to help out.
Wow.
And of course, yeah. But around 94, some other things went on Mom, and she had a mental breakdown. And then she wound up getting involved with a guy, which she idealized him. I listened to her enough that I was like, you were in a vulnerable position, and this guy started pursuing you when you were swimming at the pool. And you talk about him being like this wonderful guy, but he isn't. And she couldn't let go of the idealization. And yeah, with her, she had a car accident in 99, and she always had bad migraines, and that really set them off. And that's actually something maybe we could get into, because I wonder how many of the TLC and other people are like sensitive.
Hmm.
And I've come to learn more of that with my life. Um, so for me, going back into the 80s, uh, I was an unusually intelligent kid.
That's
Even
very
when
common in the TLC, frankly. There's
I
a
know,
lot of really smart people out there.
well, I know, and it's very much a double-edged sword,
Yeah.
especially when you deal with hardship. So, like, I was the kind of kid where my brother and my cousins would be arguing about something, and they would one of them would interrupt and say, "Let's ask Colin. He knows," even though he's like 5 years old and they're a bunch of teenagers. And I just love learning. And like a big thing with Mom, with her like prejudice towards Germans, was I start showing her the history of the Germans in the 19th century and before. And she was like, they had culture and industry and they're like leaders of it. And it was like this, like her hatred of them eventually was replaced by this pity. It was like they had so far to fall. And yeah, so I was always a kid that did well in school except for math. And I find that interesting because like people lately have like speculated if I like Asperger's or on the spectrum. And like the one big thing against that is I hate math. And in fact, like the one thing like I really click with is things like symbolism, which I know is like kryptonite for autistic people. So
Oh,
I'm not sure with
interesting.
that. Yeah. And I wondered with something for you to look up later on if you're interested with highly sensitive persons and sensory processing sensitivity. I think it's Elaine Aaron. Anyway, I know she replaced the self test lately because it was inaccurate. I could see why. Um, so, yeah, really academically inclined, did well. Even then, I always felt like different and not too separate from other kids. Like I could be a kid and interact, but there always felt like there's a difference there. And uh, yeah, I always felt like I was more comfortable around elderly. And later on, I thought like I should have been born in 1884, not 1984. I felt more like I should have been of like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis's generation.
Hmm.
And yeah, but the whole thing with that sensitivity that I have, I did a paper on it once. That's actually how I came to stumble across it. I compare it to like my fair skin. You have less melanin, you absorb more of the sun's rays, which is can be a good thing, but the downside to it is you get burned easily. And people who are more sensitive, uh, they actually see more of the world. And it sounds like a great thing until you realize how you can be overwhelmed with it, you can be burned. It just is exhausting. I remember what that thing where Jordan Peterson was going on about like if we had eyes like eagles, our skulls would be massive because the occipital lobe would just be giant. It's kind of like that where sensitive people are more inclined to perceive more, but our mind and our brain aren't equipped for it, so it gets drained easily.
Hmm.
And yeah, if you're dealing with things like abusive situations, it takes its toll more. Incidentally, with the papers I was reading, doing that research paper, it's funny because they said like sensitive people or highly sensitive people, they suffer more with abuse and neglect, but what they really respond well to is like encouragement and positivity. So I kind of find that encouraging and hopeful in a way. But the issue with me was with that sensitivity, the way the cycle of the household would come when dad would come home. He got into a thing. Mom saw it as anger addiction, where he would wait until something would be like the trigger, and then he would just dump all of his anger and frustration, and then he'd get up and leave and go to the neighbor's house. And you'd fill the house with tension. Mom was her migraines were from the sensitivity as well. Those would get flared up. She would be in bed for a few days, and that would kind of leave him to kind of have free run of the house. But for me, I equated it to being in like a household and someone's attached a hose from the exhaust of their car and is piping it into the house, and then they leave and the house is filled with it. So I sucked that up, especially my health went under. And it's actually kind of ironic. I'm not sure if you've been following Jordan Peterson lately.
Yeah, Michaela just put out a video.
Yeah,
I knew that he
but
was ill, but I didn't, maybe I didn't know any of what she was talking about with respect to his illnesses besides cleaning out his parents' basement and having a mold reaction. But
well,
did you
I
have any more
find
insight into it?
no, I just found it interesting that it was mold that she brought up.
Yeah.
Because besides the psychosomatic angle of stress going into me and having it to be expressed somehow, there was also a mold thing that impacted me. So back in a year before I was born, when my family bought the house and moved in that I grew up in, dad didn't like the pressure of the hose in the yard. So he overpressurized our water pipes, and that overpressurized all the water pipes in the house. So that meant the kitchen sink pipes were leaking. Fast forward 11 years, mom is had enough of a late 70s, early 80s, like fake dark wood panel house and shag carpet. So she did a whole renovation. And when they took down the kitchen wall with the sink there, all of the pink insulation was black mold.
Wow.
And it was only later when I like watched an episode of King of the Hill where there was like, oh, there's a spot of black mold. Everybody has to leave the house. It's a hazmat situation. I guess that was before this time because
Yeah.
they wrote all of that out while we were living there. And overnight, my health just went under. And
Yeah.
for like 1 or 2 years, I just had back-to-back bouts of bronchitis. It's funny because in school, I basically missed the most school than like all the other students, even the ones that weren't doing work and were skipping. And I still was getting one of the highest grades. And other kids were like, they believed that my mom was doing my homework and other stuff. They didn't reckon like they couldn't like match it up.
Yeah.
It's because I just like doing schoolwork.
Yeah. But
But
you not
that
only have
created,
a relationally toxic home, you have a chemically toxic home too.
well, and I don't know what lasting impact that's had on me
Yeah.
because my constitution always hasn't been great. This time of year, I always, as shown, I get sick quite often. But I also don't know how much of that is just kind of a result of being a sensitive person.
Yeah.
So yeah, that began a pattern that would go on in the late 90s, where by grade 9, well, no, first off, when I completed elementary, there was a celebration. Our teacher told us that we're going to go camping somewhere in the strait between Vancouver Island and the mainland. And I was happy because I love doing that sort of thing. I never really camped when I was a kid. And then he pulled me aside and said, like, the faculty has decided that you can't come because you've missed so much school. It wouldn't be fair to the other kids.
Oh.
And then after into grade 9, I missed so much school that they said it would be best if you have a tutor. And then the tutor said, you're missing so much with this. It would be best if you went to continuing education. And so I continued on.
But your grades were good.
Still doing them. Oh, yeah. But the big thing happened with 2004. I hate math. I spent a year and a half laboring just through like grade 11 math. Um, and yeah, by that time, my health wasn't great either, like really bad. There were times when my teachers would see me because it was kind of a free intake course thing. You would show up if you wanted to and leave whenever. The teachers would be there if you needed questions, but they wouldn't directly teach, which is actually the kind of situation I like. I like to teach myself, but my teacher would like see me basically just staring at my computer screen for an hour and phone my mom and say like, "You should just grab him, just come and get him. Like, there's no point in him being here today."
Wow.
Yeah, but I got through grade 11 math after a year and a half. I went on to, I think, grade 11 English. I had to do a thing on Lord of the Flies, and I ripped that book apart. I hated the allegory in it and stuff. And
Hmm.
this stupid setting where it's in the South Pacific, but they're trying to connect it with World War III, even though like World War III wouldn't be affecting the South Pacific. So my teacher basically took one look at my report on that and said, "I'm just going to make your A for this for the English course, and you can move on." And I decided I was going to bite the bullet and just get grade 12 math out of the way and then save the rest as dessert for the end. And he went off to get my materials for it, and he took like half an hour. And I was wondering why it was taking so long. And he came back with this sad look on his face, and he said, "We both know that you completed Math 11, but the school board has no record of you completing it, so you have to redo it."
No.
Yeah. So, yeah, after that, that was near the end of school. Mom picked me up. I went to a doctor's appointment, and by the time I got in there and up on the examining table, like that, my GP came in and took a look, and he's like, "What happened to him? He looks like he has PTSD." And I was just, and
Wow.
after all that time, like 10 years, it was just enough.
Yeah.
And it reminds me, I'm not sure how much of like Star Trek The Next Generation and stuff you watched.
I was post TV at that point.
Okay.
Um, once I hit college, I didn't watch TV again for decades.
Okay. Because there's one episode where Data goes up against like this master strategist, and he does like whatever sci-fi chess, and the strategist beats him. And so he eventually comes to Picard and says, "I'm asking to be relieved of duty until I examine what error is in me." And Picard's like, "What? You're not broken." And he's like, "But this guy beat me. Like, I'm an android. I shouldn't be beaten." And Picard says, like, "You can do everything right in life and still fail. That's to be human."
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, it's one thing for that to happen like once or twice, but when it like repeatedly happens,
Yeah.
it grinds learned helplessness into you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, after 2004, past the new year, got called into the principal's office at continuing education. He gave me the usual spiel where he's like, "Actually, you're the kind of student continuing education is made for. We're not like here for the druggies and the teenage pregnancies. It's for kids like you who are gifted and need a leg up.
Yeah.
But you've been missing so much that your spot is better filled by someone else." Yeah.
See, it's funny because continuing education is it's also sort of like homeschooling in that
Yeah.
you can do it independently, but it's mediated by the district
Mhm.
school board. So then ideally you get, all of your paperwork so that once you get into college, there won't be an
Mhm.
issue, as opposed to homeschoolers that usually have to try and show something to convince a higher education facility that this person actually knows something.
Yeah. I don't think ACE exists anymore. I think it's now something else. But it was more like between conventional continuing education, where you're basically at home on your own. It was a schoolroom setting, but it was a bit more hands off.
Well,
Um, Yeah, I think it's more like the ABE program that I later did.
Were you in an urban or a rural setting for this?
I was born and raised in Abbotsford,
Okay.
so it's very much we're outside the Greater Vancouver beast, as I call it. Um, and I guess Abbotsford's now kind of getting into the process of being swallowed up by it. But it's a very suburban setting.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
At least back then, there weren't any real high rises or anything in town. It was just a whole lot of flat.
Okay.
Kind of like maybe you probably know a lot of that around Sacramento, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Suburban. Yeah.
yeah.
So did you
And
did you eventually get your high school diploma?
eventually, but then there's kind of the wilderness that came after that period. So this is like 2005. Um, I learned the importance of ritual because I didn't have any of them. I
Mm,
could get up whenever I wanted to, go to bed whenever I wanted to, being depressed. Like, it wasn't just that I was like sitting around playing video games. I was trying to do what I could, and I actually kept learning in my own way because I just liked doing it.
yeah.
And like a good example that once was like my friend, who I've known since we were really young, grade 4. He was like just messing around on Google Earth, and he says, "Hey, check out this island in the middle of the Pacific. Like, it's got really cool, like turquoise water." And I clicked on the link and looked at it, and I zoom out and I see the name of the island. Or no, what was it? That wasn't it. No, I asked him what island it was, and he was like, "Oh, some place called Midway." And I was like, "That's not just any island, you know that." And he's like, "Why?" And I was like one of the most important naval battles in history happened there. So yeah, with what happened with like insomnia and other stuff,
Mm,
I just kept learning however I
yeah.
could, but things fell apart. 2006, grandma had a stroke. She eventually went to a home and lingered for 14 months until she passed away. That was in mid 2007. And I remember the look on my mom's face. And it's funny because of that sensitivity. I got this feeling that something like that was going to happen to my mom. And
Mm,
after that, I worked to try and encourage her to get help. But we'll get to that eventually. So, yeah, 2007, grandma dies. Mom gets like $6,000 from the inheritance. And from, yeah, like August of 2007 to August of 2008, we lived on like $3,000. And we didn't have any heat in the house. We still had electricity. And, but we basically like lived old fashioned where we piled all the blankets we could on one bed and lived in it for shared warmth. Didn't have a lot to eat. I lost 110 pounds. By the time it was over, I was like 118. And that Christmas of 2007, my favorite present from the women's shelter that mom got stuff from was a new toothbrush because I had been using one for like 8 months and my teeth felt dirtier after using it than before. Yeah, but it's a funny thing because this was a horrible time,
yeah.
but that was a real moment where it taught me like the silver linings in suffering.
Hmm.
And I remember one book you might enjoy because you're getting into Japan is Hirohito and the Making of Modern Japan. And it's by someone Bix, I think. Anyway, he goes into how Hirohito wasn't just this figurehead. He was actually calling the shots, but in a very Japanese way, which my oldest brother, he's married to a Filipino. I've kind of gotten into the Filipino community lately. So I've learned the East Asian way of indirectness and suggestions. And so, yeah, Hirohito would make suggestions about war strategy, and like everybody would recognize that it wasn't a suggestion. The emperor was telling them what to do. So, yeah, I would be reading, this was like March of 2008, having like a tea from the women's shelter, reading by just daylight. And looking back on it, I was like, if things hadn't been that bad, I wouldn't have enjoyed those nice, peaceful moments. The TV would have been on. I would have been on the computer or something. The lights would have been on. And that gave me some perspective. And anyway, late or towards August of 2008, I was able to get on disability. There's some program where in Canada where the spouse gets around 60 some little supplement. So mom and I finally like had enough money to kind of survive, or actually kind of not just survive but kind of live. And things stabilized for a year until August of 2009. And then dad showed up. The last time we saw him was in like June of 2006 as he left the house paying bills, saying, "That's the last you're getting out of me." And then he shows up and he's saying, "You got to get out. House is in foreclosure. Like you guys, yeah, you guys weren't forwarding the mail to me. Why weren't you doing that?" And we're like, "Where were you?" And he's like, "Well, I have an apartment in Surrey. Why weren't you do?" And we're like, the last we saw you, you left the house 3 years ago and you never came back. So he's like, "Oh, well, whatever. House is in foreclosure. You guys got to get out." And so like mom and I were like, "What the heck do we do?" My cousin shows up the next day and says like, "Grab a bunch of clothes. Don't worry about everything else. We're talking with the rest of the family. We'll move you over. You can stay with us for however long." Mom, with how she was after 1999, or after 99, she basically gave up existentially. Every day she would say, "Tomorrow will be better." And she was like, "Okay, I'll come tomorrow, or I'll come next week." And like she missed her own mother's funeral. So I told her, like, "You got to come now or else you're not coming." So we went over, we moved back to our hometown, Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. Our cousins found us a place. And then something interesting happened, at least for me, because within a week of moving to Vancouver Island, beginning around it wasn't just like the mold and the bronchitis I had. In 1997, I start developing like IBS and non-ulcerative gastritis and stuff. And basically my GI tract was a mess. And what I later learned, it was psychosomatic, where you get crammed full of stress. It's similar to crying. You have to embody your pain. And my body didn't know how to, so it's like, we're going to create this illness. And yeah, so for like half of my life at that point, 13 years, I had IBS, and then I moved to Nanaimo, and within a year it was gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then a year after that, my depression started breaking. And of all the things that helped with that, I got into Taylor Swift's music.
Well, there you go.
But for me, like, I wasn't a fan. I could appreciate qualities in her.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of similar to like Jordan Peterson, where I could appreciate things with him, but I wasn't a fan of his. And yeah, with her, I found it funny later on where there was that whole internet meme about how she was secretly like right wing and other stuff. Not sure how much you know of that.
Yeah.
But it was like, I knew from the beginning where her leanings were, and I didn't care.
Yeah.
I could see her good qualities.
Yeah.
But it kind of sounds conceited, but a lot of her personality like reminded me of myself. And it was this reminder that like I have a lot going for me, and I should start reclaiming that and getting my life back on course. And that was, yeah, my depression broke in October of 2010. For like 2 months, every day I like cried every day, and I hadn't cried since the late 90s. And but one thing tied in with all of that was I decided at some point I was going to check out her message board. And I signed up knowing like I'm a 26-year-old guy. I'm not going to fit in with her demographic.
With the Swift
I
list.
eventually did find a group of people my age and stuff. But one thing before I was about to leave her forum was I noticed she had an advice subforum. And it's the kind of thing someone like Taylor Swift would not have on a message board now because it would be a total legal liability. But it was, if you have questions, ask the community and see what people answer. And most of the questions were like dating advice, teenagers, like, why does this guy act like he doesn't like me when I know he likes me? And that's, women like to assume things in men that aren't there. Well, I could get into that another day. But a lot of the other questions were things like, why does it feel like there's a black hole in my stomach that doesn't go away? And I was like, I know what that feels like because I had that at 13, and that's depression.
Yeah.
So I start encouraging people to get help. I start giving advice. And that got into a thing where people would private message me. It annoys me now. People talk about DMs, but for me it's PMs, private messages. And they would, if it was more personal or sensitive, they wanted to talk privately with me. And I wound up getting into counseling like that. And then that kind of was a cascade thing with me as well, because it started like bringing to my mind other things. And I'm someone, I hate the term because of how like alternative medicine is like misused it, but like I like things, seeing it holistically. I don't like, it's why I don't like doing like speeches for English and stuff, because the essence of a speech is you have this specific thing that you want to hammer on about. And for me, it's like, I don't want to leave all this other stuff untouched on, because for me, it feels like a half a truth is a whole lie thing. But yeah, I connected other things. And one of the big moments with that, and I could say my counseling career, which began 15 years ago, was people would reach out to me and they would be pretty much upfront asking what they needed help with. And one girl started talking to me, and she wasn't talking about anything particular, but she very much wanted to talk. And after like 2 weeks of this, I was like, why would somebody that's like in their early teens, who's a girl, reach out to someone and not talk about stuff? And then I had this intuitive click, and I'm like, I messaged her and I said, are you like being sexually abused or something? And she's like, yeah, by 3 boys every day at school.
Oh my.
So on the internet, I had my days being a troll and stuff.
Yeah.
So my first reaction was to say, okay, if you're like trolling me here, you got me. That's fun. That's fine.
Yeah.
But like, I'm going to take this seriously. And
Yeah.
if you're lying, you're really going to hurt me. So keep
Yeah.
that in mind. And she's like, no, this is happening. I need help.
Yeah.
So I was supportive with her, helped her through things. She refused to speak up about it, but the teacher eventually caught them. One of the reasons why she didn't want to get help was because she was afraid her father was going to think she was a slut and easy. And I said, if anything, if he's your dad, he's going to break down crying, feeling like he failed his little girl.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
But sadly, that was the beginning of her troubles. I know from what I've later learned with psychology, like with my courses, whenever it touched upon repressed memories, I'm not sure how much you know about the whole daycare satanic panic thing in the 80s.
I know. I don't know a lot about it, but I know that it happened.
Yeah, it traumatized the psychological field. Basically, now psychology says whether or not repressed memories are real, we're just not going to touch that. So don't think about it. Don't acknowledge it. Just leave it be.
Yeah.
But I saw she became my friend. She started getting memories from when she was a toddler and being treated like a woman does and not a toddler should be treated.
Yeah.
So we later realized this wasn't the first time she was assaulted.
Yeah.
Sadly, it wasn't going to be the last.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I helped her through all of that. She later said I saved her life. I said, well, I don't know why I did. Like, I don't know what I did. And she's like, well, you were there for me.
Yeah.
If somebody hadn't been there for me, my parents would have found me dead on my bed next to an empty bottle of pills.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a big impact.
Yeah.
Because I was like, my life being like this smart person who had not gone anywhere. It's why I don't like kind of mechanical ways of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like a flawed product.
Mm-hmm.
And if if you're making GI Joes or something and one comes out deformed, you don't pass it off to the consumer and sell it. It's you just throw it away.
Yeah.
And I felt like I should be thrown away, if only because of that. My family has a high standard of ourselves. We have a pride issue. But I struggled with that, and now it was like, oh, I can't wish that I was dead, because if I was dead, then another person would be dead. And yeah, I continued on kind of doing advice things with that. I continued to support her. And eventually something happened, which I guess is kind of a watershed moment with me. And it kind of, maybe it's the way that things like a veil gets pulled back. And in a way I could perceive it kind of was a harbinger of what was to come with what the TLC knows with things. So one day, I'm not sure, I think it was like 2 years after all of this happened, so like 2012, she had this pattern. I've recognized it in other people. They don't have it in them to open up and be honest. So anytime she wanted to talk with me about something that she was reluctant to, being inhibited, she would do things to provoke a fight. And then when the emotional level got high enough, she would break down and open up. And she did this again. And then she confessed that she was getting this overwhelming urge to find a toddler and do to them what was done to her.
Right.
And her motivation for it was that she was tired of being alone.
Yeah.
Everybody said that they understood, but she knew counselors and other people, they had never been molested.
Yeah.
And so the only way that she would know that she wasn't alone is if something happened to another toddler. And if she had like done it. So I was supportive. And when this moment came, I was like, okay, like you have a choice here.
Yeah.
And you're going to cross a line and you're going to be with the guy who did this to you.
Yeah.
You're going to be with him. And you know how much you hate him.
Yeah.
And that is not a place you want to go. So I said, like, as scared as you are and stuff, you need to talk with your counselor or your therapist and like fall on your sword and open up about this.
Yeah.
So she did. And after that conversation, I sat back thinking, like, how many like sex offenders have done what they've done for that same reason.
Yep.
But then later on, like something else clicked in me. And I was like, wait a minute, if that's the case, let's presume that like the guy who did that to her did that for similar reasons.
Yeah.
And maybe that was done to him.
Yeah.
Then there's something like a pathogen being transmitted that's not seen and it's not material. And we have a name for things like that. They're spirits. And we have a name for things like that that are malevolent spirits.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, suddenly like a lot of things about my faith are making sense.
Yeah.
It's not just this abstract belief. I'm actually seeing the echoes of it in my world in a way I never did.
Yeah.
And so that brought to mind more trying to not integrate, but bringing in like Christianity into things.
Mm-hmm.
And the way things went in my life, like I came across a clip recently. I think his name's Michael Knowles, one of the guys from Daily Wire.
Uh-huh.
He talked about how he got into having conversations with Norm Macdonald on Twitter. And he asked Norm, like, you're a Christian, like, when did you become a Christian? And Norm was like, I always was. Like, it always made sense to me. And for me, that was the way it was with me, where, like, you're a kid and you're raised up and you go along with what you're raised with.
Yeah.
But one of the big things and, like, the big credits I give to my mom and my grandma was they were, like, open and honest with doubts and what they wrestled with. And, like, the big thing when I was, like, 6, when Mom first read the Bible with me, she didn't even get through Genesis, the first bit of Genesis, because after a few lines, I cut her off and I said, wait a minute, Mom. How can God create the sun and stars after he created light and darkness. And instead of her trying to like conjure up some explanation, she was like, I never noticed that. And she's like, I don't know. I don't know. And then it was, we sat and we talked a bit and we threw out theories, but it was never like a decision on what it was.
Yeah.
And the pattern of how she raised was like to trust that this, within Christianity, there's a truth. Well, there is the truth. And there's all of this here. It's things you don't want to throw away. And so whatever place you are in life, just keep it around. And it instilled in me this thing where, like in my teens, a lot of the things I didn't understand, but it was like, that's okay. I presume that I will understand it later on, even if I can understand that I don't understand it.
Mhm.
And it was later on in my late 20s and into my 30s that that was confirmed, and I start, being able to see things, especially in that way. I'm not sure how it was with you, but I know it's a thing noted with men where, like, it's not simply that we clean up our act in our late 20s and in our early 30s, we see things differently. It was the first thing I noted reading a biography on Oliver Cromwell, where Antonia Fraser is one, how she said there is a similar, she went, like, there's this usual pattern men go through at that period of life, and he went through a similar thing.
Hmm.
And that's when he really started taking his life seriously and like wanting to get into politics and other stuff. And so I saw that where it was like, I'm able to see things that I was blind to before. And I kind of was combining it all with just me continuing to learn on my own psychology. And one thing I kind of was happy with, where I wasn't just like reading up on it, I was also like observing things. Even like I got a pet cat in 2012. I never had a cat before. And so like I was kind of keeping a psychological eye towards her and like learning how cats are. And that kind of attention allowed me to kind of better understand psychology in general and little ways. And I always was happy when I'd kind of think up a theory or an idea and then later on find out that like somebody 100 years before had kind of put out that idea. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm not original, somebody got to it first. It was like, okay, there are these pretty smart guys before, and I'm kind of seeing the same thing.
Mhm.
So, but I had some struggles still back after this period. Again, with that pride and that sense that I had lost time. I felt like I had to catch up. And I compared it to someone like up in the space station when they've been up there for a year. Their legs aren't the best. So when they come down to Earth, they need to be carried and they need to go through physio to get back their leg muscle and tone. But the way I was, it was like, I don't have time for that. I have to get back up and start running now because I need to catch up on half of my life being lost. And every time I try and do that, I would just fall flat on my face and I'd waste time, months or weeks being angry at myself.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, that was the thing I had to go through because I had to like, it's kind of like making the tools to make the tools to make the tools to make things.
Mhm.
I had a lot of stuff I had to learn because I didn't know of it because of basically being abandoned.
Mhm.
And yeah, I went through that. Things were kind of going well, but then around 2014, well, it was something I wasn't aware of, but it went back to 2013. But by 2015, it was something my doctor noted. So my GP that I've had, he's an East Indian from South Africa. So he is not used to someone with this complexion. And so I would try to explain, I take after the Scottish side of my family, and he just refused to believe it. So he kept giving me blood tests for anemia, convinced I had anemia. And every time it would come up saying I'm not anemic, he would give me another one. And this turned out to be a blessing in disguise because about 2 years after doing this, he's like, you have non-viral hepatic damage, like basically
Huh.
liver damage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, so why? Like, what are you doing differently? Because I've since like 2000, I've had a Tylenol 3 prescription, and I've had no issues with that. And when he asked me that, I was like, I'm going through my monthly Tylenol 3, and then I found some over-the-counter Tylenol in the cupboard, and I was taking that. And he's like, then why? And I was like, my jaw's hurting. And he's like, well, I'll send you a jaw specialist, and we can look at that. And learning what I learned now, it was that everything that happened around 2009, 2010, it shook everything up. You could say it broke the ice that was on the lake, but then it refroze, and the psychosomatic illness went from my gut up into my
Up to
jaw.
your jaw. Yep. Yep.
And that's one of the three areas. It's your
Yeah.
gut, your heart, your jaw.
Yep.
And incidentally, what is it? Your gut has as many neurons as the brain of a cat. So it's not just
Right.
well, that gets into other things where I don't like how we've had an eye towards detail so much that we see the brain as disconnected from the rest of the body. And how I know with mental health the way it's going, they're kind of including saying the nervous system is connected to the brain. And I'm just waiting for the moment when they say, everything's connected together. But yeah, it went to my jaw. I was in a lot of pain. There would be flare-ups where I would want to rip my jaw off and I'd just break down crying. I couldn't think. And I actually got into the habit of overthinking to try and compensate for that. And yeah, it was this bad period again. And for once, though, from what I learned, I was like, I'm going to be merciful here. I'm going to give myself a few years and work on treating this. And then I want to do what I want to do now, which is I'll get into my education, finishing that up. And every treatment I did didn't work. And it eventually got to the point in 2017 where the pain doctor I was seeing said, there's evidence that shows that electroconvulsive therapy helps. The only problem is that's covered by mental health, so I can't refer you for it. So off record, I'm recommending that you go to mental health, lie your butt off, say you're suicidal, and get them to give this to you. So I said, I'm not a liar, so I'm going to be honest with them. I talked with a psychiatrist. He said, how do you feel what do you think your life's going to be like in the next few years? And I said, if this doesn't get resolved, I don't know. I'm not suicidal, but with the agony I'm in, I don't know what I'm going to be like.
Yeah.
So they gave it to me. And the only lasting effect that had on me was I didn't dream for a year.
Wow.
And I've always been a very lucid dreamer. I'm at least aware of my dreams, like I'm watching a TV. And I'm even sitting back, critiquing the dream. Like once I went into a barn, and it was probably like one from the movie Arachnophobia, if you've ever watched it. But it's filled with cobwebs. And I'm just walking through them, getting covered with cobwebs. And I'm seeing myself in the dream, but I'm sitting back thinking to myself, looking at a TV, saying, if this wasn't a dream, it would be really creepy. But I didn't have that. I would go to sleep, and it was like in a movie where somebody gets knocked out and then they do the fade to black transition and there's that little delay and then the next scene lights up. It was like that. And it makes me think about I think the spiritual but not religious type of people, they think that's what the afterlife is. Where you're aware enough to be aware that you're alive and you're sleeping and comfortable, but you're not aware enough to know enough to feel like you're trapped or want more. It's just a comfortable position. So I'm not sure what other effects that had, but it gave me a big lesson. Because for 6 weeks, I went and had that done every Tuesday and Thursday. And I had to be at the hospital at 7 in the morning. And that meant waking up around 5. And keep in mind, I was waking up whenever in the afternoon. Sometimes at night, I'd be staying up multiple days. Like I had no pattern to my sleep and day cycle. And then when it came to this, I was getting up at 5 with no problem. Between those days, I was getting up at 10 and everything was regular and fine. And then at the end of that 6 weeks, the day afterwards, I woke up at 4:30 in the afternoon. And I was like, wait a minute, why? Like, what's different here? And then I realized it was, I had a reason to get up and do things. And then it was like, okay, so I have to stop giving myself time here. I'm going to have to realize that I have to get into education, I have to get into work, and accept that I'm not going to be optimal for it, and just accept that it's going to be like a nasty, messy business. And hopefully things will sort themselves out. So I got into an adult basic education program at the university in town. And there's a really good work thing that I found. It's called like a labor internship, where you show up at like 5 in the morning and then they go like, the recycle depot needs one person, go there. Or this construction site needs someone to clean up. And it was really good because besides like having to wake up at an ungodly hour, you could go to work whenever you wanted to. And if you were sick the next day, you were fine. Like you didn't have to show up. And if things went well and you were at like a place, they would be able to work towards hiring you. So it was really a good, gentle, hands-on thing. And as I was doing that, doing adult basic education, I started with a course a semester to start slow. That was nice because I was also helpful. It was helpful for me because of the feedback of the instructors. One of them, he was imploring the students to use the scholarships at the university because they're untouched. And then after everybody left and I left, he basically grabbed my arm and he said, I was talking to you especially. You have something there, you need to make use of it. Don't waste it. So I was like, okay, I still got that. And after that, I was originally wanted to become a psychologist, but I had a good talk with a counselor there. She did the thing where she was like tiptoeing. And I asked her, she didn't open up one session, but the second session I put it to her. And I said, listen, you have something to tell me, I need to say it. If you're worried that you're going to offend me, maybe I need to be offended. So she like sighed and got relieved. And then she said, okay, you're never going to become a psychologist. At the rate you're going, you're going to be in your 50s by the time you are. So I was like, I don't like hearing that, but I need to hear it. So, okay, what can I do? So let's see about a counselor thing. But yeah, with all of that, besides that, I was getting out, being more active, walking around. Finally was able to like get the car on the road and start working towards my license. Everything was like coming together. And then in July of 2019, I was making my lunch, getting ready for work, and Mom was combing her hair in the living room, and she asked me what time it was. So I said, well, it's 4:15, Mom. And she just keeps combing her hair. So I lean back and I go, Mom, 4:15, and she's just combing her hair. So I go and like stand in front of her, and she's looking at me, but she's not seeing me. She's just keep combing her hair. And how my mom was, if I said anything like, I'm going to phone 911, she would snap at me saying like, put that down, I'm fine. So I grabbed the phone and I put it in her face and I said, I'm going to phone 911 if you don't say anything. What do you think of that, Mom? And she just kept combing. So I was like, okay, we got a stroke here. So phoned, they got there within 15 minutes. They got her down to Victoria. Got the clot out. And that was like a Wednesday, and she was back home by Saturday because she pestered them to get released. And on Sunday, Dad phoned because he heard, and he said one thing, and Mom said goodbye, shut it off. And a couple hours later, I said something about doing the recycling for tomorrow, and she snapped at me. And then after that, it was like, that effing bastard. And it was basically the better part of 4 months of just stuff coming out of her. She was disinhibited, and I look on it like a dam had broken that had held back a lifetime of not just repression, but trauma and abuse and other stuff she had dealt with. And yeah, unfortunately, I was like at ground zero as the dam broke. Um, I kind of was in a daze dealing with it. But by November, and it was, I wondered what impact that's had on me since then, because like what I did and didn't do would set her off. If she asked me something and I didn't understand what she meant and gave her a puzzled look, that would get her vicious. If I said something, it would get her vicious. And it eventually reached the point where like I was helping her lift something, and I remembered that my sister-in-law had wanted to talk with her, so I reminded her. That set her off, and she started hitting my backside as I was leaned over lifting stuff.
Huh.
And this was the woman that said, like, never let anyone lay a hand on you. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you're a man or
Yeah.
a woman. If they punch you, you punch them back.
Yeah.
So I like stood up, I got dressed, and I went to class, realizing like I don't live here anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not going to university then. Like I don't know what's happening. So
Yeah.
I moved in for a couple of weeks with my cousins that lived in Nanaimo until eventually my older brother, who I never really knew, said, we like, you can come stay with us. They were in Port Alberni, which is like an hour away. So I start renting from them. And fortunately, they have a college here, and I was able to transition to that and continue on with my education there. And since then, I've been dealing with a lot of, working through a lot of things and growing in a way I haven't.
Yeah. Is your mother
But
still alive?
she passed away 2 years ago.
Okay. All right.
So that goes into the other thing that's interesting, where, yeah, that was July 2019 that happened. I moved out, but then like I wanted to get my cat and some other stuff, and she refused to give it up. So eventually by Christmas, I told her like there are these things that she had said sitting out that she wanted to do, and I said, I bet they're still in the house, aren't they, Mom? She's like, yeah, and I was like, you can't even do that. You can't take care of an animal. My mom's a real big animal lover, so I said like I'm coming to get Lucy. So February 1st, I show up with my brother's family. I decide, because Mom hated guests. So I was like, I'm going to go ahead to cushion the blow.
Yeah.
And then you guys can follow. So I
Yeah.
went inside. And it's funny, since I moved out, the whole house went into like a bomb. And it was interesting because it did that like within a few days after I left.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I come inside and the TV's on, but no Mom. So I go into her bedroom knowing she would run away and hide in her bedroom when guests came. She's not in the bedroom. She wasn't in the other bedroom that I had been in. And so I'm kind of come out to the kitchen looking around thinking, do we have like an old lady in a nightie wandering around town? But then I looked down at the couch in the living room and she was face flat on the ground. So yeah, called my brother's family in. She had had another stroke. We got her to the hospital. At first, the stupid ER doctor was like, okay, she's ready. We can totally get her carved up for organs and stuff. And we're like, you're not going to save her? And she's like, she's been laying on the ground for 3 days. Her kidneys are destroyed. But then they tested her kidneys and they were perfect. And then after that, there was some other BS where, like, we drove back to Nanaimo because the doctor was saying, this is it. She's not going to make it. And we come back there to find the doctor arguing with the head nurse. And the head nurse is like, no, she's fine. Like, I'm not sure what like he's going on about, but like there's more arguments. She eventually pulled through from the second stroke, but she's paralyzed on her right side. And with that, someone might say that this is a sad, awful, tragic thing, but it was actually a miracle that this happened. Because again, going back to my grandma, I felt that this was going to happen. For years, I had talked to my mom, encouraging her to get help. To her, it was, I can't get other people, I can't seek help because I have to fix myself. And if I fix myself, then I don't need help. But of course, I can't fix myself. So, like, I'm just going to run the clock out until God gives me my perfect 22-year-old body again. And until then, bye bye, guys. And yeah, I told mom, like, if you don't seek help, God's going to come and like pull you out, and it's going to come with a price. I looked on it like with Revelation when like all the important people want the mountains to be thrown on them to hide.
Hmm.
God's going to reach in and rescue mom, but it's going to come with a cost. And it
Yeah.
did. But that allowed her to get through a lot of things. And I didn't realize that until before she died. So a week and a half before then, because I had gotten into the routine of coming to, she was a half an hour away. I know we're getting towards there.
We're okay. Keep
Yeah.
going.
She was like half an hour out of town from where I'm at.
Hmm.
And I would show up and we'd watch movies. I'd bring my laptop and connect with the HDMI. And this last time I did it, we watched some movies that she was enjoying. But then we watched like one that she didn't like and she didn't like another. So then I thought, like, I know the silver bullet that she'll love. And have you ever, do you know Judge Dredd?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's that 2013 one or whatever with Carl Urban Dredd. She hadn't seen it, and I knew she's gonna like it because unlike like a lot of other women, Mom loved action films. She loved justice, and so it's like she's gonna love this movie. And I
Mm.
put it on, and within like 10 or 15 minutes, she said, "Colin, like this is brutal. I don't want to watch this."
Yeah.
And I was really thrown because I'm like, Mom, you wish cops were like this in real life. Like you want them to be judge, jury, and executioner. You
Yeah.
don't. So then I paused, and then like I asked her if she still watched the true crime shows that she used to, like 48 Hours and Dateline NBC.
Hmm.
She loved those films, and she loved PVR because she could skip to the end and see if the person was convicted. And if they weren't, then she would delete the episode. And I was like, but Mom, like you're spoiling the show. And she's like, I'm not wasting an hour of my life to see some asshole get off.
Wow.
And to also frame it with how our household was. I always find it funny when people are like, I would believe in God and be a Christian, but I can't accept hell and damning people.
Yeah.
My mom's view was like, I can take or leave heaven, but there has to be a hell.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like with one thing, like if bad people have genuine salvation and are redeemed by Christ,
Yeah.
but the irredeemable people, if they don't get it all the way to the hilt, then what's the point?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
she had this in her.
Yeah.
And so I asked her if she was watching these shows, and she said, no, not since I came to the home. And then she said, I'm at peace now.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay. And then a week and a half later, she died.
Wow.
And, yeah, and I didn't cry, and because it felt right. And it was one of those good deaths that people wish everybody would have. And it wasn't in good circumstances because like between that week and a half, we had a forest fire pop up, and where I'm at, we only have like one highway that connects us to the rest of the island. And we got cut off for like 2 months when this forest fire burned down to the highway. So yeah, when they reached out to me and said that she's failing, I realized I could take this logging road and go like the long way around. But I knew by the time I got to where she was at, she would have been dead.
Yeah.
And she died about that same time. So, she died 2 years ago. Dad died 4 years ago. And that was a thing as well. Not bad. The worst thing I went through was around 2013. He had this massive heart attack. Like Mom reached out to Greg, my brother, he's a nurse. And she was asking, because Mom was also a nurse as well. And she was asking like, what's his condition? Does he recognize people? Is he speaking? Greg cut her off and said, like, he's an effing retard. He's been brain dead for like 20 minutes. Well, I'm not sure if that was not a whole thing or on and off, but it's like, there's no way he's coming back from this.
Yeah.
And he did. He spent a few months with his chest like ripped open. So they would have to directly like deal with his heart, and it was open for people to see. So he went through all of that, and not just that, but like heart muscle is one of the few tissues that don't regenerate. It's like brain neurons. Yeah. His wound up regenerating. So after the heart attack, his heart had like 15% pumping capacity. By the time he died, and that was in like 2013, he died in 2021. By that time, it had regrown to about 30%. And of course, Dad, with how like narcissistic he was, he loved all the attention he got from the doctors. There was like a line of doctors that kept wanting to come in and see this freak of nature whose heart was regrowing. But yeah, he had that. And like, I had never cut him off or anything. And that's where I kind of, from a theological standpoint, like I can see where you could, to put it one way, balancing Arianism with like Calvinism, where I can see the parts of my life where it's not me that's chosen things. And like one thing with me is I've never had like resentment or anger at him. And I can see where that's a gift that I was given for some reason. It's not something I've ever chosen. And yeah, there was one time, probably within a year before he died, because he had phoned every once in a while and we'd talk. I learned more of his perspective on Mom. I realized whatever issues Dad had, Mom was high maintenance enough. There's a lot of personality in her. I recognize that her side of the family, there's like bipolar stuff going on. And temperamentally, I can see where that's kind of affected me, where I want to like take on the whole big picture at once. But one of the things he said once was, there is a lull in him talking. And then he said, like, Colin, I just want to let you know what happened to you when you were younger. I didn't have anything to do with that. That was other people and circumstances. And I sat there for like 2 or 3 seconds thinking, like, God's given you a gift of surviving this huge heart attack. You've been through all of this and you still can't face up to what you've done. Yeah. But then I thought, you know what? Whatever. Like, I'm going to forgive you. So I said, like, okay, Dad, thank you for telling me. Yeah. And yeah, it was just, I had to let go of that because Mom, there's rumination on her side of the family and she never could. And that's why she needed that stroke to let go of it.
Yeah.
So
how did you find me in this corner, and how did that all come about?
Somewhere along the line, Jordan Peterson popped up in the news. It was that one thing where he was like in his rolled up sleeves talking with students. And again, there's something I hope he eventually can reconnect with. It wasn't so much what he was saying, but how he was relating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, it was like he was talking to them the way my mom talked, where he was being authoritative, but he was like, I'm going to include you as something of an equal to talk, even though I know more. He wasn't being an authority wagging his finger like he later became with the up yours woke moralist crap. Yeah. But that was interesting. And so I didn't listen to his lectures. People were chopping them up and putting these interesting bits. Yeah. And the big thing that resonated with me wasn't the lifestyle stuff, because it kept being like, okay, he said this. That's what Mom said when I was younger. That's another thing from Mom. That's another thing. Okay, it's nice to get confirmation. But for me, it was him touching on symbolism and other things. And I like to get enough of an idea of something and then go off and learn it myself. And that's when I realized, like, I applied it to my own interests. And I was like the Alien movies, especially the first one, they're a dragon story. They're a chaos camp story. we dressed it up in science fiction and think that it's this new thing, but it's actually a very old story. It's space being the unknown, chaos lurks in the unknown. It's a formless, ever-changing creature. But then when it fully comes into being, it's a dragon and it lays waste to everything. So that kind of clicked with me. And it also kind of clicked with the things that I not necessarily butted heads with my faith, but basically butted heads with North American Christianity. And like I've come to see like fundamentalism not as an opposing thing from the scientific viewpoint. It's the same thing. It just disagrees on this what conclusions.
Yeah.
And for me, it's not like either or. It's like I don't really like either of you anymore. And you're not seeing a bigger picture here. And that kind of whetted my interest. From that, I saw Jonathan Pajot. That was more of an in-depth thing, explaining that. And then somewhere along the line, you popped up in recommendeds, and I liked the way you talked, and actually prefer your Sunday sermons because you're down to earth and blunt. And I know I know people have complained saying like, why aren't you like that with your sermons? And you're like, well, I'm doing it for other people at the church. This isn't the Paul Vanderklay show, but for me, well, you don't do it as badly, but I don't like the pastor demeanor that is often done. And to put it one way, I'm not used to talking this much. My brother, when was it? Maybe around 2000, 2002. He dragged my family to a Ken Ham thing at church. And I sat listening to him, and I pay attention as much to vibe as to details. And I just did not like the vibe from him. It felt like mostly rhetoric.
Yeah.
But what I did find interesting in that was he had a guest speaker who was this Czech geologist. He's kind of this chubby guy with a neck beard, and he shows up and adjusts his glasses, and he did a paper about some caves in the Czech Republic and how in like the late 80s or early 90s they went in and examined this cave, and then they came back like 10 years later, and the cave formations like the stalactites and stalagmites, they were significantly larger than they anticipated. They had grown what they thought was going to take centuries.
Huh.
And what I found interesting was this guy gave that presentation, laid out kind of the facts, and then when he was done, he just ended and walked off. And it was like, I don't know this guy's position. He could have been just some geologist that was like, this Ken Ham guy's a little weird, but I get a free vacation to British Columbia, so sure, I'll go along. He could have been a young earth creationist who is like a firm believer like Ken Ham. I didn't know. And he never made any conclusions from it. He just laid this out. And I found that interesting, as opposed to Ken Ham, where you know what his conclusions are before he speaks. Yeah. And so I kind of saw that in how you speak. And also your, to put it one way, like complex faith. And this is a thing also I'm wrestling with now, with where I'm at. And maybe it needs different words, because I don't like either of them. I don't like calling people simple faith, having simple faith. And I don't like people looking down on that. But at the same time, like with complex faith and people being intellectual, everybody knows intellectuals can be snobbish. People who aren't intellectual can be just as snobbish. And it's very annoying. I actually have a term that I forget when I named it. but I call it like the Republic of Kings, where like the egalitarianism that we live in today, people kind of assume it means everybody's a peasant, everybody's down on the same level. But the way people operate, it's like they want to be treated like everybody's up on the same level. Everybody's a king. Everybody matters. Everybody's opinion is gold. And everybody's opinion isn't that way. And it can be especially hard in this past 12 years or so where the way things have gone with like the breakdown in trust and other stuff that I've seen.
Yeah.
Where it's people are like entrenching in their own little opinions, their own little kingdoms of opinion.
Yeah.
And I really don't like that.
Yeah.
But also connected to that, like with vibe, as I said, I found 2013 interesting. I forget the dude's name. It's Terrence something. He was some boomer philosopher. He went into innovation or whatever. He was the guy that went on about how like 2012 was this big deciding period, and after that, innovation was going to decline. Someone in the comments, if you post this, will mention it.
Yeah.
I kind of rolled my eyes about that because he's the guy that was really into like mushrooms and the stoned ape
Oh, is
theory.
McKenna, Terrence McKenna?
Yeah, him. But I found it interesting how after 2012, I felt like this anxiety descend on the world. And that was when I start noticing online, or every message board, whenever we talk about current events, everybody's conclusion that they would leap to is this is a false flag. So Assad in Syria gasses Aleppo, well, that's a false flag. Or if Israel bombs something in the Golan Heights to target Syria, well, that's a false flag. And it's like, if everything's everything can't be a false flag. So I'm not sure what's going on here, but I can see that people don't want to trust that things are what they appear. And that vibe of anxiety and tension I find interesting because I start feeling it relax last year. And I can't say that like Trump's reelection ended that. I would look on it more like it poked a hole in the Macy's Day Parade balloon and it's leaking and it might be plugged and it might reinflate, but we'll see. But tied into that, someone might say that, well, this is the usual leap people make, saying, well, that's just your subjective experience. Who knows? You've had a rough life. This is just you putting this on the world. And I would argue against that because if that was the case, I would be saying that like the 2000s being like the worst years of my life would have that feeling, and they didn't. I could tell my internal hell that I was living with, but externally everything felt fine. And then there was that shift. So I find it interesting how that's going. But yeah, tied back in with that simple and complex faith thing, you kind of scratch that itch.
Okay.
And well, it can be difficult because I don't have many people around me that are like that. And many people, again, with kind of the anti-intellectual snobbery where, like for lockdown, I was renting a suite from my brother's family. And so we did like church, we would do some stream for a sermon. And one day my sister-in-law, she was like, it's your time to choose a pastor to listen to. And we listened to like 2 of your rough drafts. And she's like, we're not going to listen to him anymore. And I even like in Bible study with her, the guy that leads Bible study, he loves deep diving, rabbit holes, digging in the meaning of whole stuff.
We should
when
go to the Sunday. You should go to the recordings of the Sunday school lessons for her. There's all the rabbit trails. Not
yeah,
not the 25 minutes on Sunday morning. That's just
yeah. But she said with you, like, oh, not with you, with the Bible study, um, like it was too up here for
yeah,
her.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, that's kind of rough. And
That's all right.
well, I'm still dealing with a lot myself,
Yeah.
but
Well,
it's getting better.
you've told your story well. Was there something else you wanted to go into? I don't want to,
Uh,
take all
yeah,
your time with your story.
let me peek here. Um, it would be interesting to go in if I could one day. There's a whole bunch of other things. One thing that I might put in your head to encourage you is to watch old westerns like Gunsmoke again and compare them with today. Because I got into watching westerns 10 years ago. I don't watch them now, but they're not the stereotype that people make them out to be. There's a lot of nuance.
Mm-hmm.
And the big thing that hit me with that was how they were done by men who had experienced World War II and were wrestling with the repercussions of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was like the only period of time, except maybe in the 80s in places, where there was like TV that had direct criticism of pacifism. And there are so many episodes where like Matt Dillon would say to the pacifist of the show, of the episode, like, I'm with you. I would like your way of seeing things to be the norm. But like these bad guys in this episode, they just want to kill people. And if
Yeah.
you go with them quietly, it's just going to make it easier.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's funny how there is that wrestling with it.
It's in Sacramento, there's how the over-the-air TV has, have these signals and they can now have all these channels. And there's one channel over-the-air TV that is 24/7 Westerns. And a lot of, the Rifleman and Gunsmoke and all of these Westerns. And it's so I think you're really right in that a lot of those were wrestling because I just finished that book on the Pacific War,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember when Ken Burns did his treatment of the war in the Pacific. I mean, you look at what those Marines did in on those little islands in the Pacific. This.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's astounding that the last Japanese soldier, that they were in the jungles until the 70s. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's
In the
this,
Philippines.
yeah, it's this incredible thing. And you think about that generation. So I had an uncle who I think he was in flying fortresses. And as a kid, I was, very curious and interested
Mm-hmm.
in World War II history. And I just got that out of him that he was in a bomber. He said a little bit about it. I never heard another thing
Mm-hmm.
out of him. A lot of people, they when they were done with that war, they did not want to talk about it. And so then you have this, what's so interesting about your story, you've got all this trauma from your youth and um you're very conscious about not only, you're very conscious about, okay, what did that trauma do to me? And we're
Mm-hmm.
such mysterious creatures with respect to trauma because we're so indirect. It's the gut or it's the jaw. But it is this sense that things are in the system and like what you talked about with your mother that, okay, but there's going to be a price to pay. There's
Yeah.
often a price to pay for something. And your mother's story about her, her love for Judge Dredd, because again, you're exactly right. You wouldn't think of a woman of her age just loving it, but these true crimes are such a phenomenon right now. And there are deep reasons why people are hungering for this. They're they're working stuff out in these ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so And you know, for you, for your life, I mean, obviously you've had a front row seat
Yeah.
to all of this, and now you're at a point where you're no longer under the tyranny of your father or your mother,
Hmm.
and you've got space and you can learn, and that Taylor Swift period of
Hmm.
helping these young women. That's another interesting passage about how it came up in our estuary meeting yesterday.
Hmm.
People were wrestling with there's a lot of disorientation happening culturally, and people at a lot of different levels
Hmm.
are dealing with this. And then one of the things that comes up is it really helps when I help other people. I think that gives people an incredible sense of, even though everything
Within
feels
limits.
so out of control, I have some agency, and maybe I can't save the world, but here's this person over here with a need. Boy, it feels really good to meet it. And that then helps recalibrate this picture of the world that
Hmm.
I have, and helps me have a sense not only that there is good, but have a sense that I can participate and contribute to the good.
Yeah, and there's also, well, it's more complicated than that too, because I've had a glimpse of the thing. Well, with people wanting to be like activists and politically charged,
Yeah.
well, that's like Jordan Peterson 101, where it was like they wanted to save the world and deal with the big issues of what's going on instead of starting in their own life.
Yeah.
And I ran into that in my own little way quickly after doing that counseling thing, because somebody would reach out to me. I would help them with their issue. They would thank me and they would leave.
Yeah.
And there was this pattern that I recognized where, like, afterwards, I would get really angry. I wasn't angry at them. I wasn't angry at myself, but I was angry. And I thought, like, why? And then it clicked with me where I was like, I cleaned up their mess and now I've walked back to mine. And I know I haven't touched it. So it's like, it's good that I'm helping people, but I can't use that to run away from my own stuff. And I need to balance things here.
Yeah.
And that also helped me, I guess you could call it a localism, where, like, if you want to save the world, you have to start in your neighborhood, in your town, and you might think that that's beneath you or it's not a lot. Like, so what if you help this little part of the world? And it's like, that's all you really can do. And again, getting into that Republic of Kings thing, someone like Elon Musk, he wants to, well, I think that's the great curse of people like billionaires. They want to fix the big problems of the world because they have nothing else left to do, which is their curse. But other people have this conceit nowadays where it's like, I want to solve the big problems too. I don't care if I don't have billions. I want to deal with that too. I don't want to deal with the lesser stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like you're not someone in that position, and really, no one should be.
No.
It reminds me of a well, it reminds me of a quote of Clemenceau. He said, "War is much too important a matter to be left in the hands of generals." And I feel people say, like, the world is much too important to be left in the hands of God.
Mm.
We have to directly deal with things like the environment and other stuff. We have to manipulate the materium to get the desired result. We can't leave it. And I think people don't realize how limited we are in being able to do that.
And actually working to try and clean up a little mess is
Mm-hmm.
remarkably, I mean, I really liked, I mean, Jordan Peterson did, so, okay, start with your room. And that's good advice to give. And then if you're actually in a relationship with another person and you think, well, it shouldn't be so hard to help them. And whenever people act like that, I always think, oh, you've never really tried, have you?
Yeah.
You've never really paid attention. And I found this so often in churches. I saw this in missionary service too. I really love that image you gave, a Republic of Kings,
Mm-hmm.
the peasant versus that was really insightful. I really liked that because I noticed that like when I was in the Dominican Republic, people wanted to come in and like give things away. I want to
Mhm.
come in and here I want to give this and I want to give this and I will give this because people were poor, people were happy to
Mhm.
receive it, and that felt so good to them because it sort of created this it created this little narrative around them where they could be the savior, where they could be the
Mhm.
savior. I saw this so often with the homeless people who lived right over there where this is one guy because he was everybody knew he lived here and
Mhm.
everybody knew his name and oh my gosh, I got so many stories. But so then people would stop and they would give him things. They would give him food. And he was almost always barefoot. And so they'd give
Mhm.
him shoes. And so they would drive by and they'd give him some food and they'd give him some shoes. And then he would say thank you. He was very nice to them. And then he would walk up here and talk to me. He says, they always give me shoes. Why do they always give me shoes? And they're always giving me food. I don't need food. And it was true. He didn't
Mhm.
have shoes because he didn't like wearing shoes, although he should have been wearing shoes. And he had plenty of food because the dumpster of the grocery store right back there, I mean, the whole
Mhm.
neighborhood ate from that dumpster. And so, hey, fair enough. But and often they give him money, and people just really liked doing that. And but it was so interesting because when you're living in the middle of it, there were also aspects of him and aspects of others that they very much didn't like. And
Mhm.
then you began to see different aspects of the neighborhood sort of warring with each other through him because some of the people were really happy that they could give him things, and other people were really frustrated because
Mhm.
they basically enabled what was kind of a problem in many ways
Yeah.
because he was bipolar, and so sometimes he could be a really sweet guy, and other times he would just cuss people out for walking down the street. He'd threaten them. And so the neighbors who lived right here at that point were like, and then he was also a hoarder. And so he would when the day everyone would put out their bin, he would go through and find anything that he found that he thought was any value. I remember I drove up to church one day and there's this big old toilet sitting right outside my office door, and it's like, you know, and
Hopefully,
then
it hasn't been used.
well, somebody anyway. So and
Mhm.
then he would then go into his depressed phase and he would live here amidst the garbage, and then he would get into his manic phases. Pastor, I'm going to clean this up today. And he usually would. He would clean the whole thing up and he would scrub it all down and it would all look great.
He
And but
did
it was
that.
what's that?
He did that though.
Oh yeah, he did. He'd
Yeah.
get manic and then he'd be like, I'm going to clean this whole thing up, Pastor. And he would clean the whole thing up. But
Mhm.
then he would be manic on garbage day, and then he would bring all new stuff here. And we would just go through all of these cycles according to his cycle. And then, of
Mhm.
course, once when I was in the bed, if I wasn't here to sort of manage him and the neighborhood and the church, that's when bad things happen. So when I was gone on
Mhm.
vacation, that a member of the church who would often clean up around here, he would go he was usually banned from different um, stores around here because of the ruckus he would cause. So we'd have to walk a little ways to get his supplies, mostly his beer. And so then he'd be gone for a few hours and someone would clean up his stuff. And then, he attacked an 85-year-old member of the church because, how dare
Mhm.
you touch my stuff?
Mhm.
And so anyway, on and on and on and on and on. But um, and so people want to sort of have the movie experience of being a do-gooder when the truth is it's actually a lot of it's an incredible labor to bless someone in all of their complexity, and that comes out so nicely in the story of your parents where a lot of people listening to this, and I've known plenty of people who had difficult parents, and they sort of left the weighty thing of forgiving their parents and took
Mhm.
upon themselves the more weighty thing of never forgiving their parents.
Mhm.
Because one, you think that forgiving them is weighty, and it is, but
Mhm.
carry around that non-forgiveness for years and decades and see what that does to your soul.
I
You know,
compare it to like one of those old-fashioned irons for the ironing board. If you like grab onto it and it's hot, and it's that thing where with the burn, it's hard to let go, but it's like you have to fight to let go because the longer you're holding on to it, the more you're burning your hand.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of wisdom in your story, and I think you really told it well. And so I think others are
Well,
really going to appreciate it. Again, with these conversations, it's so interesting because on one hand, these conversations are my favorite part of the channel,
mhm,
but they require a lot of the audience. And so for that reason, not a lot of people listen to them.
mhm,
But that's almost always the case with most things that are of value in this world. Most things that are of value in this world require something of us in order to value them.
it reminds me of what Dominic Sandbrook once said. I know you like the rest is history as well. He said like there's a thing about history where it helps where you have a bit of like the edgy stuff, like Aztecs committing human sacrifice, that draws people's attention in. And I do know there's the guy who his dad was that cultist from like Washington State around Centralia. I found his story particularly interesting. And like the silver lining in that is like the craziness helps keep people's attention.
It's true.
There's others where you listen, they've talked to you, and it's like there's not really anything going along here.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully that's the case with this video. But
Yeah.
one thing I worry about that you touched upon is I think a conceited thing in the West that we've had for a while, even probably going back to the Middle Ages, is this presumption that we are there to help people, and how much is us helping people, helping them, and how much of it is like us inflating our ego.
Yeah.
And the way I see it is a lot of people today that would like demonize and despise and condemn like the Victorians are the modern Victorians.
Exactly.
And well, I have a tutor, she went to Africa and went to a school, and their hallways and schools were packed full of textbooks and stuff. And the one teacher explained, saying, we don't want these things, but we keep being sent them. They're all in English. We speak French, but they keep sending them, and we tell them to stop. And then it's like, how much of that also is like an indulgence being sent?
Yeah.
Forgive us for our sins of colonialism, but we're still also kind of doing a colonialism thing, especially when like, people in Uganda don't like homosexuals, and you really should be like us, but also be your own thing. And yeah.
No, it's very true. And that was actually one of my favorite chapters and the chapter I probably learned the most of in Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life.
Mhm.
He had this chapter where, and I just recently realized that it
Mhm.
was Greg, his friend, who actually edited that book, which makes sense then of why We Who Wrestle with God is such a mess of a book. And 12 Rules
Mhm.
for Life read so well. Um, but it was, he made the point that so often a lot of the do-gooding that we do in our lives are
Mhm.
subtle. There's subtle ways of serving ourselves. And I mean, you can see that so often in church, but you also see the other kind where there are others that are saints. And, then when I look at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, I mean, Jesus really gets at it. He says, don't let your left hand know what the right hand is doing. Do your do-gooding in a way that nobody will see you.
Mhm.
And, that you can twist that around and have a perverse pleasure out of it, but it's a safer
People
way of
always
do-gooding.
do. Yeah.
There's always a way to pervert something. There
Well,
really
I
is.
saw that in my family with that pride, where family, even within the congregation that my mom grew up in, where it's like, oh, those prideful people think that they're so good, but they're not the best because they're prideful. They're not meek and humble like us. We're really like the best people. And I could get into the congregation, especially my grandma grew up in, because my grandpa served in World War II. He had a weird thing where he served, he saw combat, but he didn't. His only operation was landing at Kiska. I'm not sure if you know that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a yeah.
the Japanese pulled out, and then the Americans and Canadians landed and charged at each other in the fog. So, yeah, he got to see combat, no Japanese. Also, there was a bunch of booby traps, so he saw friends die.
Mm.
And then he got shipped back to England, like right around before D-Day, and then he got sepsis, almost died. What they did to save him raised his body temperature enough to kill the infection, but not kill him. But it destroyed his right eye. Which incidentally, even though he could still see light and darkness, that technically means he wasn't blind, so he didn't get compensation for that. So he came back, and Mom always remembered Grandma was so thankful he never had to have the weight of like taking life on him in combat.
Yeah.
But Mom's reaction was like, but Mom, he could have killed like Nazis and Japanese. Like those are the people that need to die, like with my mom. And yeah, the women in my life, especially on my mom's side, are firecrackers. I often said with the pattern in my family, the women and the men have well-developed animus and anima, like the masculine and the feminine and the feminine and the masculine. And it's one of the many ways that we're odd from most other people. But yeah, we always had that. And I always remember one story of Grandma when she was like a teenager. She was leaving her house, and there was this kooky guy that was in the congregation. And he became convinced Grandma was possessed by a demon. So as she left, he ran up, grabbed her by the forehead, and started speaking in tongues. And Grandma was a consummate English woman, so she was always stoic and calm. And she calmly explained, "You don't let go of my head. I'm going to punch you." And he ignored and just kept going on in tongues. So she punched him and punched him and punched him. And by the time she was done, his face was just a waterfall of blood. Neighbors came out and they're horrified, saying, like, "What are you doing to this poor guy?" And she's like, "He's the one assaulting me." But like, that's the kind of women I lived with. And it's the only reason why my dad survived his marriage was because he was a coward and he used like verbal and emotional and financial abuse. Mom said, like, if he had been physical, she would have beaten him to death. But of course, being the Brit, she could only throw the last punch, not the first one. But oh yeah, that was what I wanted to relate with my grandpa. When he came back after being discharged, the congregation found out that like he was smoking and drinking. So basically everybody put it to him, you have to give these up. You have to stop going to the pub. You have to quit. I could understand Grandma being that way because she grew up with a lot of alcoholism in her family. But the issue was he gave up those things and they still held it against him because it was, yeah, you're redeemed. You can be a part of the congregation, but you're tainted now. You're never going to be as perfect as us who've never been blemished. And it's like,
Wow. Well, if Colin, I don't know if I'll leave this up to you because often what'll happen after something like this, if someone wants to get in touch with you to talk with you about something, are you open to something like that?
Sure. You mean like someone else as a part of the TLC, or would
Yeah.
it be like one of your group things?
No, someone else probably part of the TLC.
Okay, sure.
The TLC is the only people that watch these videos.
I know.
And I hope too, I know that we have a church in Burnaby that has been thinking about starting an estuary. And so I told the pastor, I said, well, if you start an estuary, maybe I'll come up there, help you get started. So,
Okay.
and so who knows?
Well, I wanted to keep in mind if there was any estuary things, and I know it's kind of one of the complications here where, well, it's not so much one being on the island.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to like living in the interior, but you don't drive for 2 of the hours that you're traveling to the lower mainland.
Yeah.
So anyway, let
Yeah.
me know and we can,
All right.
yeah, keep doing
Real
that.
good. Well, maybe we'll talk again sometime. Because it's fun.
Well, I hope so.
You've got great insight, and you've got a great story, even though it's something that you've earned. Um,
Well, that's one thing I want to ask, where because for everyone that's listening, we I kind of did like a little quick thing when we were eating at the Aviator Museum,
yeah.
and when I said it, you were like, "Oh, you have a hard life," and for me, that really hit me because I never thought of it that way.
Hmm.
For me, it was just a lot of waiting and other stuff,
Hmm.
and but that made me think about like they say about war, it's like 99% mind-numbing boredom and 1% like absolute terror.
Yeah.
And I can see where like my life was like that. But has it been hard? Would you say from hearing that?
Well, I think, I'd have to the funny thing about being a kid is you don't really have a lot to compare yourself
I
with.
know.
So as compared to the home I grew up in, yeah, it sounds really hard.
Yeah.
And what's, again, part of why I like doing, asking people about their stories is because it is helpful comparing notes. And when we do so as adults, it's interesting to see, kind of how we came through it.
Hmm.
And, as a pastor in a church, it's sort of when we do a talk like this on the internet, it's kind of a fishbowl because you and I are sort of safely we're divided from each other, and we're divided from the audience by this fourth wall, and anybody can click us off the moment that anything gets too
Hmm.
uncomfortable. But when you're in the church, it's a very then you're in the terrarium, and you're in the then you've got all of the animals in there, and you're having to deal with them, and you've got old dudes who think they're gonna exercise your grandma, and not knowing that no, your grandma's gonna punch his lights out if he doesn't let go, and he's going to hold
Yeah.
on because he's sure that that's a demon that's hitting him. And it's like,
Hmm.
no, you're just being a bit daft here. And
Hmm.
you should probably let go for the sake of your face. So,
Well,
no,
there's so
it's,
much more too. Well, I'm just thinking about what struck me when I met you was you are a loud talker. You
I
are
am.
booming when we're having that conversation. I was kind of looking around at other people, feeling like it's kind of like when someone has their phone on when they're watching a video and it's too loud. But
It's the
yeah, it's
bane of my wife. My wife is just always, you talk so loud. It's like, I talked loud when you married me. It's so funny because when I would get together with my sisters, all
yeah.
three of us were loud, and neither of my parents are loud. And it's like, where did this loudness come from? I say it's from New Jersey. It's a noisy place. We got to speak up
It's
so
not me
everyone can
being
hear
a
us.
pastor because our pastor's he's nuanced, but he leans more towards being introverted, and he's quite a quiet
Mm.
speaker. So yeah, I was reflecting on the guy who's video recording. I forget you saw. He has the twin.
Yes, yes.
He was saying you were saying how like a lot of people who become pastors aren't introverted, but I think it's more common than many people realize.
Yeah.
But
It's
anyway,
it's an interesting. Anyway, Colin, I've got some parishioner things I need to do.
yeah, I got a lecture here I got to get to.
But it was
And
great talking to you again, and I hope we can meet again and talk again sometime.
well, I got a whole bunch of other things more to
All
go
right.
into.
Real
Okay,
good. Take care.
bye.
Bye bye.